So in this video, what we're going to talk about are the different series of the small valve that Quaker used with the loaders that put on the tractors up to 80 horsepower. And so what Quaker has done over the years is actually had multiple series of valves over the years. And so externally the valve looks the same. The way it plugs into the hoses is exactly the same. So I have made the mistake of actually sending out parts that work with the current series of valve that Quaker uses to people who I didn't realize actually had an older series of the valve. So for example, I would send out a spool. What would happen is it looked right, but then when the customer would try to slide it in, it wouldn't actually fit. So those pieces that have a really tight tolerance don't always switch over exactly. And then also some of the internal pieces, the tiny little like springs and things like that, some of that can be a little bit different internally. And so what I'm doing in this video is I'm going to show the different series over the years, and there's a few distinguishing things on each series that you can look for on your valve to know which one you have. Now, we have some of those parts in stock for all the different series, but of course we need to make sure that we're matching up the part we have with the exact series that you have so that we know that the part will work. So this is the current valve that Quaker puts on its loaders that are going on tractors of 80 horsepower or less. And to distinguish if you have this one, these are the distinguishing marks. Got a bolt in the middle of the valve body on the top, as well as on the bottom. Also on the bottom, you have two round circles. This spool comes out extra far, and it also has a blue tag on it right there that should say Pace Manufacturing. And then also right here it has the two bars. I mean, they're not really bars. This is cast as far as I can tell, but there's basically two lines in the valve body right there. So if all of those pieces match up with what you have, then you know that you have the current Quaker style valve. This valve is also a Quaker OEM valve used on the loaders they put on tractors from 80 horsepower and less. And it's very similar to the current valves, so I think this is the newest one before the current one. I'm not positive on that, but it's very similar to it. It also has the bolt in the middle, which goes to the back of the valve body. The differences, though, are that it doesn't have that extra long tin cap on the spool. It does not have any type of tag right here. Certainly not a blue tag. And the back, there's one round circle, but then there's kind of a horseshoe shape on the back as well. And then this one does have those two bars in the cast body, which does look like the current version. This is also a valve that functions the same as the current series, but there's a few things that are very different externally to it that helps you identify that it's definitely one of the older series of valves. If you look closely here on the valve body, that bolt is not there, or on the back. So that is not there. Also that cap, that extra cap on the end is not there. And notice that it's painted black. The fact that it's painted black is actually important for helping identify which series that you have. A few other identifying characteristics on this one is it does have the two bars cast into the body. And then I think this is kind of unusual on the back, but it has the two bars cast into the body on the back side as well. This valve has been taken apart, but you can still see some similarities and differences between the current one and the other older black valve that we were looking at earlier. In this case, this one is also painted black, so that tells us it's a fairly old series. There's just a center bar down the middle there instead of the two bars cast into it like the other black one we were looking at. This one does not have a bolt on top, but it does have a bolt on the bottom. And then this one does say made in Italy on the bottom. And then one other thing that's unique about this one is this is that spool that we were talking about that was extra long with that tin cap. This one has like a little rubber cap on it that makes the spool stick out a little bit further. So those would be all the identifying characteristics on this one. Oh, as far as a tag, this one has, it's kind of hard to see in the video, but it has like a metal tag with an imprint in the tag right there with some letters and things in it. Typically it would start out D06 on that tag. And then there's this valve. I personally consider this one to be slightly mysterious. I think it's probably the oldest series of valves that Quaker used with its small loaders of this style, the oldest series of this style. It does function the same as the other series. It has the same flow, the same pressure, all of that. I guess what intrigues me about it is it seems like such a high quality valve. The body is cast. It doesn't seem to be painted. It's just a silver color. There is that tag stamped in it, which you can actually see quite a bit better on this one because it's not painted. And that also starts D06, which is the same beginning of the part number as that black painted one that I was showing earlier. There are the two bars here, and then it does not have that longer cap, either rubber or tin on it there. On the back, there's the two bars, and then it does say made in Italy on the back as well. And then it's got the two round spots there. There's no bolt in the valve body. And then one thing that I have found is different is this port is smaller than the current version, and it's smaller than what most of the series had. This is a number 8 port. And so if you get the current part number for the Power Beyond with the Quaker valve, it's not going to work in this one. Pretty sure Quaker still has a part number for the Power Beyond that goes in this valve, but it's definitely a different one than the current valve. But anyway, this is a super nice valve, and there's definitely a number of these out there as well, just judging by the people I've talked to who've had this one. So this one must have been used fairly extensively. All right, and one last little, I don't know, snippet of advice maybe, or just information, is always beware when you're taking apart a valve body, especially if you don't actually have like hydraulic training in your background or whatever. Some pretty wonky things can happen. This is the relief pressure valve. In general, you really don't want to touch that. It's just helping everything function correctly and flow correctly inside, and it's actually a safety thing. If you take the pressure relief valve apart, you will most likely lose pieces because it has little pieces that fall off and fall out, and those little pieces unfortunately are specific to the series of valve. And even a hydraulic shop typically doesn't have an exact replica of what you need to replace that lost piece. And that would be a crapshoot whether we have that or not. That would be a little bit more of a hard piece to find even with what we have in stock. And then also when you're taking apart the spools, pulling this out, these little pieces came out also. A spring, you can see there's a little BB in there. Oh, there's something in there. It looks like it might be broken. Spring, another little BB. I honestly wouldn't have any clue how to put this back together. So it's a good idea when you're sliding your spool out to slide it out, tape everything up on this end, and then slide it out this way. That way you aren't in danger of losing all these internal pieces. Typically, again, if you're replacing this spool, you want to tape this stuff together on this end and then slide it out that way. Because again, there's internal pieces in there that are easy to lose, hard to put back together. Now, the question is, well, I guess there's several questions. A, when do you want to buy a whole new valve? Or B, when do you want to just buy parts for it? Well, if it's an external piece, typically you're going to be okay buying a part from just the current version. So there's the handle. As far as I know, this threads in just fine to any version of the Quaker valve that you have. I have sold this multiple times and I've never had any complaints come back that it didn't thread on correctly. So you should be fine getting the handle. The other thing we carry is what we call is the joint kit. This is the external piece that the joystick is attached to, and it's what the joystick pivots upon. These pieces will break sometimes. Sometimes the little ball bearings inside there wear out and pop out and things like that. So this we carry. I have also never received any complaints that this didn't work after a customer received it. And in fact, I have this valve. This is actually a valve in my stock. It's a rebuilt valve where my customer traded it in, and all that was really wrong with it was the handle was broken and then the O-rings needed to be rebuilt. So what I did was I gave my technician our current pivot kit, and he went ahead and installed it, and it went just fine. And then you can tell though that this is definitely not the current version because it doesn't have that blue tag on it on the front here. So this, and it also doesn't have that extra cap on the end. So this is definitely a different series of Quaker valve. But these joints worked just fine on it. So you should be totally fine buying the joints as well. Where things definitely get more tricky is as if you have a leaking valve. In this case, this was a trade-in also. I went ahead and had my technician take a look at it. The spools are fine, totally fine. You can see they're not snapped off on the end or anything. And he was going to rebuild it. Then he noticed as he was about to start rebuilding it, inside this valve body, it was cracked. I don't know if that's something that you can diagnose outside of like a hydraulic shop, whether it's just leaking seals or a cracked valve body, but I suppose if you did rebuild it with the O-rings and it was still obviously leaking internally, at that point you really do need to buy a complete new valve for it. It does not work to repair a cracked valve body and to bring it into a hydraulic shop and have them buy this valve body piece and replace it and reuse the spools. That just doesn't, it would just be way too expensive. It would not make financial sense. So if that's the case, if you've rebuilt it and it's still leaking, or if it's leaking and you're not sure if it's cracked inside or O-rings, go ahead and you're justified in spending the money on a new valve. Speaking of O-rings, we do sell a rebuild kit for it. It's technically an aftermarket O-ring kit. But again, I've never had any issues of that kit not working with the multiple series. So as far as I know, the O-ring kit that we sell for rebuilding this valve does at least fit the different series of the Quaker valves that look and function the same as the ones that I've been showing you in this video. You can feel confident when ordering the O-ring kit that it will fit your valve. You can't feel 100% that it will fix your problem necessarily because it could be a cracked valve body. But O-ring kits aren't that expensive. Typically it's worth a try. If you're experienced with taking valves apart and putting them back together, it's probably worth a try to go ahead and rebuild it. And if at that point the valve body is cracked and you have to get a new valve, well, you're not out of that much money. This is definitely the trickiest problem. When the tip of your spool has cracked off, as you can see in this one that has happened. That is probably the most frustrating problem because it's such a tiny little broken piece. It does require either getting a replacement spool, and again, that's tricky to find. That you have to make sure that we know which exact series you have, because of this spool right here, if you replace that, it will not slide in unless you're getting a spool from the exact same series that you have. Like I said, we do have some in stock for most of the series, but it's a little bit of a it takes a little bit of work with trading pictures back and forth, and a few phone calls and things like that, just making sure you're getting the exact right spool. Now, it's tempting to think you can repair it because it's just a tiny little broken spot on there. However, this is hardened steel. This spool is hardened steel. You can weld it, but it won't hold. And so either the part needs to be replaced, or if we're not able to help you out with finding the exact spool for that exact series, you do need to buy a whole new valve body, or sorry, just a whole new complete valve in that type of situation. Here's a close-up of the spools. This is what they look like inside the valve. And things can happen to the spools. Typically it's the tip that's breaking off the spool. There. I've also gotten stories where they just don't really want to tell me what happened, but the tip did break off. I never get the whole story. I don't know. I guess it just happens. I will let that be remain confidential, whatever your situation is that caused your spool to break off. But regardless, it happens. And so finding the correct replacement spool that fits inside your valve body correctly can be a little bit tricky. And so a lot of times in those situations, a person will just choose to buy a new valve